Welcome to Second Sunday Forum. It's hosted by the West Falmouth Quaker Meetings, Peace and Social Order Committee, which I'm clerk of. My name is Erica Adams. We acknowledge that we're on Wampanoag land. Today is June 9th, 2024, and our speaker is Christine Smith, and her topic is Small Bites, Big Impact, the Unleashing the Power of Food. Are you ready towards a journey towards healthier community and lifestyle with a deep passion for all things food and social justice? Christine Smith of the Marion Institute Southcoast Food Policy Council Program Manager will take you on an eye-opening exploration of the relationship between our choice of food and the impact on our community. You will have a deeper understanding of the problems surrounding our current food system and in our area, and innovative solutions that you can readily implement today. Christine Smith began her social justice career as a missionary in Taiwan with the Society of the Columban, then worked with Catholic Charities in Maryland and Idaho, and Catholic Relief Services. She has educated the public on social justice issues, enhanced partnership relationships, supported community organizing efforts, planned conferences, and advocated on state and congressional bills. Christine has a BA in history from St. Mary's College in Maryland and an MA in religious studies from St. Mary's Ecumenical Institute of Theology in Baltimore. She enjoys hiking, bicycling, traveling, and relaxing on the beach. And before I introduce you and give her the platform, I want to tell you we are being filmed. And if you don't want to be filmed, turn off your video yourself. You could do that. And this will be posted with Christine's permission after it's edited on YouTube. We have a site. And also, in the question and answer period, you can put into chat as the talk is going on, any questions that you might have, or if they arise later, and we'll have some time for that. I think that is everything. Christine, I'm looking forward to your talk.
Thank you, Erica, and thank you, Brenda, and all of you for joining us today. I don't know if it's tradition or not, but I'd love to hear who's in this space. So if you want to use the chat and just say who you are and where you're calling in from or zooming in from, that'd be super helpful for me too, so I can kind of pull out some of the details if you're in a specific area. That'd be great. Thank you so much. So with that, I will get started while you're putting that into the chat. I'll just introduce myself real quick. So the Marion Institute has been around. We are a nonprofit in Marion, and we have been around for 30 years. Our focus is started in biological medicine. For those of you who don't know, it's looking at the individual healthcare through the lens of 3 different pillars. One is nutrition, which is where our programming comes in. The other is detoxing your body from environmental and other heavy metals and other things that we're eating, and also immunization, so building your immune system. Through those 3 lenses, we've been doing program work throughout. So when you go onto the Marion Institute and look at our work, everything is based in those particular issues. So the nutrition, we have Grow Education, which is our farm to school work, the Southcoast Food Policy Council, which is really coalition building to identify what the problems are in the community and the community working together to solve it. So we convene and we advocate. And then the third program that's related to nutrition is our new one. It's Frogfoot Farm, and I'll talk about that later. So I'm going to look at the chat real quick to see where everybody's from, just to make sure I speak to your areas when I'm talking. Okay, cool. All right. I didn't know if anybody was from out of state. I wanted to be able to pull on those little nuggets too. So, okay, with that, I will go ahead and get started. Okay, so I spoke a little bit about the Marion Institute. You could see the programs along the bottom that I briefly spoke about. The other piece I didn't speak about is our greenhouse initiatives. And that's really looking at for groups who want to be a nonprofit but are not, but they want some help getting there. We have that particular program where we do some administrative and financial work for them. They pay us a fee and it helps them move along we kind of do technical assistance so they can become their own nonprofit. All right, I'm going to move on from there. So today you will learn about the challenges and assets of the food system in our particular area in southeastern Massachusetts and the Cape. We will talk about lessons in the food system due to climate change and what you can do. We'll talk about the Southcoast Food Policy Council, some of our plans and successes, and we'll specifically kind of focus in upon request about the Farm to Food Relief program that we operate and are just starting, FrogFit Farm, and our particular regenerative process that we're going to be using and where we are at that point. We'll talk about the Eat Local Southcoast Challenge and how you can get involved, and the legislative advocacy on the Farm Bill, which is related to the work we're all doing. And then certainly we'll have other things you want to discuss or learn. But I will say I added in a piece on number 2, the lessons in the food system due to climate change. I just briefly wanted to have a moment of discussion during that time period to just get your thoughts on what you are seeing as climate change impacts. And then we'll delve into, based on what you've seen, here's some of the things that we should probably do to start to mitigate that. So that's what we're going to be doing today. We'll be starting with our land acknowledgement, and Erica kindly started that process. So if you want to take just a few minutes and just read through this for yourself. So this is a good space to kind of start our talk about food and the whole food system. It just puts us in the right spiritual place. So the food system is pretty complicated. And you can see here what we put together in this particular diagram. Northbound Ventures is a consulting firm we use to put together our food system assessment, and we really worked with them. So to help you understand what the food system is, let's look at this. So we're really looking at production, how it gets to how it's grown and have raised. And then we're really looking at then where does it go from there? It goes to processing and manufacturing, then it goes to distribution and all those different access points. Then it goes to actually food access, who has access to it, where does it go? And then in consumption, really looking at how do you use this food? Do you know how to access it? Is it affordable? Is it nearby? What skills do you need, like cooking skills and so on? And then the last piece is food recovery. What happens to the food? So the food system, we're all in it. We're all in different pieces of it, but it is an organic process. It actually is its own ecosystem that has impact on itself as you move through the system. So in our particular area, I'm going to start with both the challenges and the actual assets that we have in our area for food production. So I'm going to first start on agricultural, then I'll move to seafood, but we'll start with agriculture. So the average age of farming is continuing to rise. Currently, it's 59.8 years old, and that's kind of a problem. There's a lot of reasons for that particular challenge. One is that it is hard to farm. Farmers really make 96 cents on the dollar on average, so it's difficult to make a living. And it's hard to figure out if your kids don't want to do this succession planning. There's also the issue of actually accessing loans to buy land. Is it equitable? And often it is not. And I will say it is not. And we're still working on that. The other piece is 40% of farmers are women and 98% are white. Huge equity issue that we want to work on. Certainly we want to promote farming at a very young age, but there are a lot of barriers to all these particular pieces just to get into the farming industry. Like I said, farmers continue to struggle to be profitable. Farm labor wages are low. It's hard to keep people into the field, and it requires skilled labor, and it's hard. So when we talk about farmers markets, then sometimes you hear people say, where are the farmers? Well, oftentimes they don't have the capacity to be both doing the farming and being out on the field and having enough staff to go out and do the farmers markets and farm stands and so on. So that's a big issue. The lack of access to land, the cost of land. We're losing tons of land to development, especially in New England. But in Massachusetts too, we're looking at land that's being bought up that's arable. This is fertile land that's being bought up and consumed by the development sector. And then unpredictable weather patterns make it really difficult to figure out farming, and you lose entire crops in a year, and this is difficult. So there's a lot of challenges around that. I was asked to share some of the information on community gardens and what is that impact on our food system. Certainly you have a lot on the Cape. This is probably I don't know if this is completely comprehensive, but it's certainly what I was able to find online. And some gardens will actually, it is specifically targeting about growing food for the community. Some are just growing food for your own home, and that's totally fine. And there's a lot of different ways to do this type of farming. So just know that you have a lot of great assets on the Cape to be able to delve into. A lot of faith groups are going into this particular sector well, and it's more of having raised beds, and for the local community that belongs to that faith group to actually do the farming on that particular piece. A lot of land on the Cape is sandy, and it's really difficult soil to farm. That's why there's so many raised beds, and that's something to keep in mind. So I would just say continue to investigate this where you can, and continue to look at ways to do this together. And if you have access to take this food and expand it out to the community, and great. And if you don't, that's fine. Just, this is one of the ways that you can start looking at producing food. And another way to grow local all year is greenhouses. And greenhouses are really difficult to fund and to build and to maintain. But if community gardens may start wanting to look at that, if you have capacity, that'd be a way to actually start building out how much food you can produce in a year. Now, let's look at the seafood side of food production. So you have some amazing seafood on the Cape, of course. And Barnstable and Chatham are one of the top fishing ports in our area for Massachusetts. So obviously the biggest seafood that we work on in this area is shellfish, groundfish, lobster, and there's not much diversity. So when you starting to look at climate change impacts, one of the key pieces about climate change is you do want redundancy. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's truth. So if you want to do that, but there is some redundancy in the system, but you also want to have diversity. I know, like, what are you trying to say here? Meaning when one particular crop is wiped out, and I'll talk about the shellfish industry in a second in our particular area, New Bedford, you want to have some diversity present in any system, whether you're growing chickens, you're raising shellfish, whatever you're doing, there needs to be both an amazing amount of diversity. So when something happens, when you combine everything together in one small area, that's when diseases start to grow, and there's a lot of issues wrapped around that. And then you get into antibiotics and all that kind of stuff. So really, you're really looking at, if we want to be resilient in our new climate that we're in, we're really looking at being diverse in what we're doing. So we want to look at that from the lens of agriculture and the lens from fishing. So some of the challenges that we face in fishing, whether you're on the South Coast or you're on the Cape, is centered in shallow water and the need for dredging. When you look at towns, what they're asking for, there's a lot of ask for getting money for dredging. So that's something to think about. And that also causes a huge impact on the local environment in that when you do dredging as well. So there's some balances there, or there's some issues to look at. There's a lack of affordable berthing. So if you're small fishermen, that's actually a challenge. And also to find parking space, oddly enough, in that particular area, and offloading. Now, this issue, while I'm talking about the issue with seafood, it is exactly the same thing we're seeing with agriculture. There's not enough space to actually have cross-docking and trucking space and all these things. So there actually is a lot of mirroring going on in whether you're seafood or agriculture and fishing industry. So those are things to look at. The permitting is arduous for seafood. Talking to aquaculture fishermen, unbelievable what happens, and understanding the complexity of all those permits within those like coalitions and those big fishing industries. It's quite difficult, and there's a lot of paperwork and there's a lot of hurdles to overcome. So when we're looking at what is justice and what is it to provide equity, permitting is definitely an issue to look at. Just like farming, the age of fishermen is increasing and fewer people are going into this industry. And again, part of that is it's difficult. Are we making enough money for those people to make a living? How easy is it to get into that field, like buying your own equipment, getting your permitting going, and so on. There's also an increase in pollution that's making aquaculture and fishing untenable. And that's what I want to share with you, what's happening along the Southcoast. So part of climate change is you're having more storms in our area, and over time, we live in a very old infrastructure in New England. And when our sewer systems get overburdened, what happens is all those we get flooding that's going into our different water systems. And they shut down the Buzzards Bay farming area for aquaculture for about 6 months this year. And obviously that has a dire impact on the different fisheries that are in that area. And the EPA has these regulations for health safety reasons, right? We don't want to be eating food that's bad. So while those regulations are in place and it's causing hardship to the farmers, there's also equal argument about, hey, they're there for a reason. But just to say, the bottom line for the economy and what we need to do is really build the infrastructure. And the sewer systems are at the town level. So it's really looking at this towns pulling down money to redo their infrastructure systems with sewer, and what that looks like with severe storms going to be more intense, longer periods of time, and so on. So those are some of the challenges that we're facing in food production and fishing. The second piece of the food system is really centered in aggregation, processing, and distribution. And I spoke about that last year, but just again, remind people what that is this is the second part. When you're a producer, where do you bring your food to get cleaned, cut, packaged, labeled, and then distributed? So this is this middle section, which is often overlooked, and it's the section of the food system that people know least about. So there is capacity for more fishing in our area, obviously, but the problem is that we don't have a lot of processing center and aggregation for small and mid-sized fishermen. The entire New Bedford district is set up for the international fishing industry to bring fish, all those big boats come in from internationally, and we have these huge warehouses set up for the processing of fish and the distribution of fish, but not for small, mid-sized fishermen. So this has been a problem, and it's a problem for the Cape as well. So the other side of that, in looking at holistically, is the slaughterhouse situation. So while there is small little traveling, when you're raising livestock, whether it's chicken or meat, lamb, there is no livestock slaughtering house for years on the Cape and Islands, and that's a problem. And there wasn't in the Southcoast either until Meatworks developed their processing center in Westport. And again, the issue is the bigger international or bigger farm, the industrial farm situation, whoever owns those pieces get first in line to get their meat slaughtered and packaged and so on. So I'm not exactly sure where the Cape is right now, but it was the idea where you had to ship all your meat over to Vermont or New Hampshire to get slaughtered and cleaned up and cut up and packaged and then brought back. So that's a huge expense to a producer to be able to afford to do that, or to use a middleman to afford to do that. And then you're getting kind of cut out as a producer. So just to say that some of these pieces are difficult. And while there is micro slaughtering processes that can be pulled into your farm to use, there's a lot of health department regulations wrapped around that. It can be quite difficult to actually put that in place. So that's another piece of that middle system. It's also important to look at the middle system is wrapped around commercial kitchens. So you have quite a few on the Cape, but there's room for more. You have Family Table Collaborative, the Cape Cod Culinary Incubator, and Pisces Coastal Kitchen. And why it's important to have commercial kitchens, whether you're growing food to bring to a school system so they can do scratch cooking to go to the schools, or you're a small restaurateur that doesn't have a commercial kitchen, but you have like a small, you're maybe selling stuff online, or you have a small front, but you have no commercial kitchen in your space, you do need commercial kitchens. And it also helps to grow businesses. So there is room for the Cape for more, and certainly in our area in the South Coast as well. We do have Hope in Maine, in Warren, Rhode Island, but that's the only one in our area. But you do have some on the Cape. So I would say good job for the Cape, but there's room to grow in that space. There's also food hubs, and I know you have Farming Falmouth, which is doing a fantastic job within that region. Is anybody on here from Farming Falmouth online today? I want to be able to tap you for a moment if you are. Is anybody here from Farming Falmouth? I know.
Yes, there is.
I am.
Hi, Patricia. Hi.
Hi.
Do you want? I want to give you a moment. I'm putting you on the spot. If you want to say anything about what you do on the Cape, I just want to give you that time to make a shout out.
Okay. Well, we do a lot of things, a lot of different things. So we're pretty new. We're about 5 years old. And we started, we kind of evolved from a group that was helping to advise the town on the purchase of Tony Andrews Farm, which was put into conservation. We started an orchard there, a community orchard, which is still young. It is starting to produce, but not to the point where it's useful for community picking yet. We installed the first of our community gardens, the Marina F. Andrews Garden, which is listed. There are a couple of others that I put in the chat that have come online since. We have a service garden that's expanded hugely at Tony Andrews Farm. So the service garden started as a 1/16 of an acre. It's now a 1/4 of an acre, and we are growing very intensively for donation there to our local service center and also to veterans groups. We have a greenhouse that supplies seedlings for that operation so that we can interplant really quickly, replace crops, and keep it really intensive. We pay a lot of attention to our soil for that reason. Let me see. And we are also, we do workshops for backyard gardeners and homesteaders. And we have just done a soil microscopy course with NOFA. And we are in the process of buying our first piece of land ourselves to put into conservation.
Great job. You guys are amazing. I would totally love to collaborate with you offline. I just wanted to say that. I'll reach out to Patricia later. Thank you so much for sharing that. So yeah, you have a lot of great things happening on the Cape, and it's quite miraculous. It's because it is difficult soil, as Patricia said, and that's one of the big things to look at. Right. So other food hubs, when I talk about a food hub, it means different things. So one of the things that we're looking at is how do we, like I said before, how do we increase that middle space of aggregation, distribution, and processing? So food hub is often when you have farmers who don't have the ability to be at farmers markets, because I said earlier, they're really farming and they don't really have the capacity to do more than that. So a food hub will often be the aggregator. So aggregator takes all the different, like if you only have, several bushels of kale at one time. The aggregator takes all this food and puts it all together and then sells it to the public in different spaces. So whether it's online or it's in a farmer's market, but that's what aggregators do. And so the Cape has space for that. And Falmouth Farming, you guys may be moving into that space or doing pieces of that space, but that's definitely a thing we're seeing more of, because we're seeing more people, more farmers are wanting to sell their space, wanting to sell more food into the local economy, but cannot. And so they're looking for somebody who to be an aggregator. Now, I know Family Table Collaborative also takes, and I don't know about the others, do take farm food, and then pushing it into the system in different ways. But we are looking for more food hubs in that sense. In the Southeast, we have Coastal Food Shed, who is the aggregator and processor, who then distributes it through all those farmers markets and online. And we're seeing, as you guys know, the economy is moving towards online food. And so we need to jump into that realm where we're getting the food directly from the farm to the customer without going through a big box company like Amazon. Well, great. We just really want to support the local economy. So all I'm saying is there's space for that, for any collaborations up on the Cape, if you're thinking about it or talking to other people. I know Coastal Food Shed is looking at our entire food shed from Norfolk County, Bristol County, Plymouth County, the Cape and Islands, but it's going to take a while. And we're also looking at that as well, but it's going to take a while. So I'm just throwing this out there as something to think about. Looking at food access. So in Barnstable County, food access is really, is food local to you? Is it accessible to you? Meaning, can you get there through transportation? Can you walk there? Can you get the food? Is it affordable? And things like that. So that's food access. But when we're really looking at it, it's also, is it affordable? So Barnstable County in 2021, and obviously the stats will have changed, but that's what I have information on, is 7% of the residents use SNAP. SNAP's does federal funded supplemental nutrition assistance program. For those of you who aren't aware of that, that is what used to be called food stamps. And we saw the highest levels of use in Provincetown, Denison, Falmouth, compared to 12% use in the rest of Massachusetts. And only 2% of those eligible for SNAP are using HIP. So those of you who don't know HIP is the Healthy Incentive Program. So that's a dollar-to-dollar match with SNAP. So if you have SNAP, you're already eligible for HIP. So HIP, you can only use HIP at a farmer's market, a farm stand, or where a local farmer is going, and only if you're HIP certified. So if you go to the DTA Finder, I put that website up there, that's where you can find your local HIP vendor. So for those of you who work in the community, if you work with people with SNAP, certainly do find out about HIP and just let people know that it is a dollar-to-dollar match. So if you have $40 on SNAP on your EBT card, you have $40 on HIP. So you can go to a farmer's market, pull out your EBT card, and tell the farmer you're using it for SNAP, that fresh fruit and vegetables. And so that's how you're really, if you have $40 on SNAP, you really have $80 of use. But people are not using it because they don't know about it. So just find out more about HIP and start sharing that information with people. The other thing about food access is really the lack of dry, refrigerated, and frozen storage space. Both food pantries and everybody else in the community, if they had more space, they would accept more food to give to the community. So one of the things we're looking at, which is why FSIG, for those of you who don't know, there's a grant in Massachusetts called the Food Security Infrastructure Grant Program. And we encourage farmers and businesses that work in this space and food pantries to look at FSIG, FSIG, as a way to build actual physical infrastructure out. So we've seen food pantries build out their frozen storage space. We've seen farms actually build out farm stands. So this is another thing to think about when you look at food access, is where do you store it to then move to the next position in the food system. And we know that for people in the community, local fruit, vegetables, dairy, and meats are the hardest to find. They're the most hard to afford. And so those are some particular things. You have already some great resources, and on the Cape, and I put the link to there, and I'll be sharing this PowerPoint with you guys. So you can get this food resource guide that has a lot more than just what I shared. And you also have Cape Cod Cooperative Extension, which has a ton more resources on there. Andrea Marsley is the one who is in charge of that particular program. Thank you, Paula, for putting that in there into the chat, the information about the DTA finder. All this information is already available to you in these different resources. So, but there are some challenges, like I said, and it's across our whole area. It's not just on the Cape that these are challenges, it's across our whole food system, Massachusetts. So you do have some amazing, speaking of food access and how to access local food, you have some amazing farmers markets that are already in place that are spread across the area, and they're open different times of the year. And you can find out about this information. I think every farmers market I found has their own website. Most of them are actually updated through their social media pretty well. And so I just encourage you to share with others where all this information is, like all these different farmers markets, and go with your friends, take your friends and go to different farmers markets. I think this is one of the best ways. If you want to keep local farming going, go to the farmers markets and spread that word and tell people to go and go together. If nobody's been to a farmers market, sometimes people are intimidated to go into a new space, but go with them. All right, so food waste. You have some great stuff going on in the Cape, actually. There's one active landfill that I found in Bourne. Of all the towns of the other towns, about half send their waste to the Covanta CMAS waste to energy facility, and half send their waste off Cape to landfills. And some of the issues wrapped around that are obviously in the climate change issue, but you have 85,000 tons of municipal solid waste that are generated on the Cape. 30,000 tons are organic that can be separated into the different areas. But the good news that you already have reached out. The Cape has already explored how to use that organic waste. You have Black Earth Compost, Habitat for Humanity, Harvey Waste and Recycling Republic, NASA Disposal. So you're already doing a lot of great things. With the food waste, obviously you can do more. And I see, Patricia, you added Found the School District is diverting organic scraps for composting. Brilliant. Yes, and we'll talk about that just now and what that looks like. So the EPA just put out a new kind of infographic on how, as humans, we should be really looking at wasted food. So they're no longer calling it food recovery. They're now calling it wasted food. So it's a new term that they're starting to put out. Is we're looking at, instead of how do we recover food, how do we look at wasted food? So the first thing, and you go from the left side to the right side. So start at the dark green at the top on the left, prevent food waste. You prevent food waste by only buying what you need, only producing what you need, and only serving what is needed. So that's the first thing is, so for instance, school systems. We're finding that school systems are doing a much better job of actually buying their food to prevent food waste. They're actually figuring out how much food waste they have. And so they're starting to cut back on different things that they buy and actually providing food that's actually just being eaten. And we're seeing that in multiple places, but not enough to make a huge difference. But we can do that on an individual level as well. Only really preparing the foods that we're actually going to eat, or you're going to be really looking at preparing the food, freeze it, dry it, all those particular pieces, which is actually also part of the other side of the food system. So food prevention is preventing food waste. That's the first issue. The second thing is donating. So the rule of thumb is if you're having an event, the same time you're actually buying your food and putting together your what you're going to have for that day is you're actually preparing the back end of food recovery. So if you know you're going to have this much food, prepare like 10% food waste. So already have all those organic capture set up. So already have your recyclable materials to put the recycled food in, the captured food. Already have identified which food pantry or which organization is going to take the food. And so do that at the same time. Also, just consider upcycling your food as well, having it reused in a different way, meaning in your own home too. So think about all those ways. So donating food to food recovery organizations or food pantries that will accept, not all food pantries can accept food simply because they don't have the space or the time that you give it to them, they don't have anybody there. So you have to really figure those pieces out. And I will provide you information on the Cape, what that looks like for food recovery going to food pantries. The next piece in the scale is feeding animals. So if you have organic materials, there's some farmers who have set up their farms to do actually organic recovery that will go into feeding pigs or going into their own composting system on the farm. But not every farmer can do that. There are a lot of Department of Health regulations wrapped around that. So you really have to find which organizations do that, which farmers do that. And so there's some things to think about. The next piece is composting, whether it's in your, as an individual in your backyard, or all those community gardens potentially could set up actually, if they set it up right. Like I belong to the Wareham Community Garden and we have our own compost system where you can bring your compost from home, but there is a very rigid set of processes we use to make sure the compost is good. And you know, your green compost, your brown compost, and all those particular pieces, but it doesn't have to be that difficult. It could be just a matter of different parts of knowing where to bring your compost. So that's something to think about. There are some places in Massachusetts with anaerobic digesters that actually take the compost and the steam within that generates energy. So that as the food and the organics is broken down, it actually starts to run a machine that generates energy. So that's anaerobic digestion. It's not the best thing. We want to keep the food into the food system or into the soil. That's the best use of food or of wasted food, is those two issues, but you can't then make energy out of it. So that's great. The other piece is applying that to the land. So again, composting, using it in the soil in different places. The last thing you want to do, and the thing you don't want to do, is sending it down the drain, sending it to a landfill or to be incinerated. So we're trying to prevent that. All these pieces are all ways that we can reduce methane gas and actually keep the food into the food system where it's meant to be with humans and animals. So if we can kind of follow this and kind of help other people move this system and understand the system, then we can actually start reducing those methane gases and keep the food from being wasted. About the other piece that I don't have in here is gleaning. Gleaning is actually part of this, although it's not here. We have about 30% of our food that is left on farms for a variety of reasons in the United States. Sometimes when you go to a grocery store, you will find that all the food looks the same. It doesn't, and it's all perfectly looking. And that is the rest of some of the food is not harvested because it's not perfect. And where it might have holes, and there are a variety of reasons why it's not harvested. They may not have enough staff to actually pay to pick up the rest of the food. So that's where gleaners come into hand. Now, gleaners are people that go out onto the field and they recover. Brilliant. Thank you, Patricia. Falmouth Farming has a gleaning program and also accepts backyard production for donation. Brilliant. Share your bounty. Great. So the other piece is gleaning. So within gleaning, though, you want to train the volunteers and you have to talk with the farmer and you want to actually pay the farmer. So part of the issue with getting a massive gleaning project up and running is that you want to be able to make sure that farmers are paid for the food that's actually being gleaned. They grew that food. So a big gleaning program would be providing stipends to those farmers if you can get a big group going. So when you think of Boston area gleaners, you think of, what is it called in Rhode Island? Sharing the Harvest, maybe? Sure, it's part of Farm Fresh Rhode Island. They pay stipends to the farmers who are allowing people to come onto their land to glean that food. Because again, farmers, it's difficult to make a living farming. So we're looking at that as part of the food waste setup, is really looking at what does gleaning look like then. So no food is wasted onto the field. So that is part of the process. All right. Now, Again, talking about what is happening on the Cape. If you do want to do something in the Cape, there's already something set up. So Cape Cod Extension has already set something up. So Andrea Marsley, you can see her information there. They are looking for accepting excess food to rescue, to bring to their food pantry partners. So that whole system is set up already. So if you want to contact her and you know the community gardens or farms that are interested or businesses that are interested in food recovery, contact them. They have all that system and the distribution system set up completely already. So just contact Andrea to get something going in your area if you're interested. So if you want to talk about 2 restaurants or 2 hotels or the other businesses to bring that, just contact her. So now I want to stop, and before we go into more of the impacts of climate change and the lessons we've learned, I just want to talk, I'll stop the PowerPoint and start really listening to you guys. We'll have a discussion on what are the impacts of climate change. So I just listed one area. We are seeing more intense storms and longer storms over, instead of storm moving off. We're seeing a storm system staying over an area for a longer period of time. We're seeing more intense droughts over longer periods of time, and we're seeing more intense storms. So just take yourself off and mute. What else are you seeing or reading or hearing on what are the impacts of climate change in your world, in the Cape or whatever? You can just take yourself off and mute. Thanks, Paul. So what other impacts are you guys seeing? Yes, the slides will be available. I'll show you them out.
One thing I've noticed is that some of the invasives have just taken over, just huge. I mean, the size, just the size of the poison ivy leaves are incredible.
Thank you. Yeah, we're seeing with this intense rain, we're seeing really big plants and yeah, that's growing, and invasive species are something to consider. Thank you. What else?
Slightly different growing season, a little earlier, and maybe less.
Depending on what climate zone you're in, the growing season within our climate zones have now shifted. So, you know, the climate zone, when you get seedlings and you look to see what climate zone it will grow in, those are all starting to shift as well. And so the seasons and how many things you can grow during that season have shifted. Thank you.
One thing I've observed, and I even read it in the news, I saw articles online, increased mercury levels in the bloodlines of fish and shellfish.
Yeah, we're seeing, as you guys know, there's massive pollution in the ocean. A lot of things have moved into the ocean and they're breaking down, and the mercury is certainly one of those things. And once it gets into the plankton and it gets into the smaller fish that are eaten by the bigger fish, and then all that it's an accumulation effect. And so the bottom dwellers, certainly, and we're seeing it across the chain, there's more mercury. And so, yes, you have to be careful of how much seafood you're eating and which type of seafood has more mercury than others. They are tracking that. So you can always find out what fish has the most mercury and what has the least, and kind of look at that. But also, as somebody who works at the Marion Institute, I would say also look at detoxifying your body from chemicals like that. And there are lots of processes to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. Yeah.
I have a more positive one, Christine,
Okay.
which is that with all the focus on climate change, we've come to focus a lot more on getting carbon into the soil, which from an agricultural point of view is a great thing, right? It means we're going to end up with a lot better soil and perhaps more topsoil over the longer time as we start to do that, particularly if we can convince the commercial farmers to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Carbon capture, there's a ton of money going into energy, like clean energy and the environment, and recognizing climate change. So the EPA has a ton of money out there, the USDA, for different types of farming, for carbon capture, seaweed and lots of pieces of the aquaculture industry are carbon captures, likewise with soil. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. And so if you're in the production system, there's now a lot of technical assistance on how to do that, because not all farmers know how to do that, but you also need to have the resources to do that. And that requires money oftentimes. So that's a big piece, is going down as a farmer. They want to do that. Most farmers are all about feeding the community, and they're the ones living every day in that micro environment of being hyper aware of climate and the weather. And so they just need help drawing down the money so they can use those pieces of technical assistance on their farms. So that's fantastic. Thank you for that piece of good news. So yes, there's a lot of money available. It's just accessing it and getting the technical assistance to do all those pieces. And a lot of unusual collaborations, speaking of that. So whether you have solar and wind on your farm, or there's a lot of pieces with energy and what that looks like, there's a lot of modeling going on. Likewise, on the ocean, there's a lot of different types of models that are out there to look at how do we do climate mitigation, and farming can be definitely one of those where we are actually helping the environment now by these farming techniques. And again, it's the USDA. We have to push from the Farm Bill. This goes back to policy. Make sure that there's money in the Farm Bill for these programs for climate mitigation practices. Are there other impacts you're seeing? Carol?
No, I was going to say, did you see Patricia? She has her hand up.
Oh, sorry. I can't see. I'm sorry, I can't see everybody. If somebody has a hand up, please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. I had a couple of comments. One on the seafood front. What we've noticed, local people who fish, is that a lot of things are moving northward. So, I mean, certainly lobsters trying to find cooler waters, and that seems to be happening with fish too. That some species are tending to move northwards. On the land front, I agree with Steve that in some ways climate change offers us an opportunity on farms to do the right thing. We should have been doing this all along, but climate change is kind of focusing attention on this. And farmers, we're actually lucky to have certain parts of farmers, certainly reasonably good soils because of the moraine outwash. But with the kind of farming that we're doing or growing that we're doing, it's very intensive because we have small spaces and have to make the most of what we have. So yeah, replenishing the soil is a huge thing for us.
Yeah.
I would also say that there are the opportunities perhaps to start growing some things or growing more of things that require a slightly milder climate because we're moving in that direction. So there are opportunities.
Thank you. Thank you so much for adding that. Yeah, we're finding the fishing industry is moving further away from land and into colder environments. And some of that is the pollution that's in the water closer to the coastal areas. And some of that's temperature and that whole marine cycle of where's their food. So they have to go further away too. Yeah, it's all cyclical, but I'm so happy to hear all those particular pieces that are happening on Farming Falmouth. Yeah. So soil health is in the soil plan. Massachusetts has a soil plan that you might want to investigate if you're interested more in healthy soils. There is a healthy soil plan that's everybody's looking at. And the reason I bring up the funding, if we work collaboratively across the state, working with the government, we can draw down a whole lot of money to put into all these particular pieces. But this is a opportune moment, you're right, in time to kind of start tackling the mitigation through climate mitigation through agriculture and different food productions. So great. Other environmental or climate change impacts you're seeing or want to talk about? Okay. Sure. Stephen, go ahead. You can yeah.
Thank you. So I wanted to just kind of briefly mention that we have very recently started a project that you probably find interesting, which is what we call Friendship Gardens of Falmouth. And this has basically two components. One is where we're growing food on the church land, basically, and then giving that to the local food pantry. We just did our first delivery Thursday, so we're well underway on that part. But the kind of the long-term important part is that we're also looking at giving away free raised beds to people who are challenged. And so we were going to pilot that in the fall, but it turned out we had an opportunity to start this week instead with our local organization that supports the homeless called Belonging to Each Other. And so starting on Tuesday, we delivered a set of raised beds for them. And most importantly, we deliver mentoring with that so that the people who are most at need learn how to grow their own by going out and working with us in the garden. So we're kind of excited about both aspects, but particularly the raised bed part.
That's fantastic. I'm so excited for you guys.
Yeah.
Good job.
We're having fun.
Yeah, I know. Farming is very much on both an art and a science, so have fun with that. Yeah. So we're more gardeners than farmers, but that's okay.
It's all
learning. It's all learning. It's all good. Yeah. All right. So, any other climate impacts? Because then I'll dive into what are some of the key things that kind of address all the particular pieces. Okay, so obviously when we look at climate change and what are the lessons, we just need to keep the word resilient and sustainable in mind. Those are the two key pieces that we look at. So one of the things that we want to look at, and these are probably not new lessons to you, you've probably heard this in a variety of different spheres that you are in, but really being less reliant on animals. There's an enormous amount of water use that we put into the entire animals, any animal you work with. And also in production that both methane can be a byproduct of all those particular pieces with animals. So those are just some things to be more aware of, is our reliance on that whole animal structure and the industrial food system, and what agroecology can be mix animals in with what you're producing in a healthy way rather than what we've been doing in the industrial food system. But just know that one of the key pieces moving forward is how much really do we want to rely on animals as one of the main proteins in our world. That is not a judgment. That's just simply a question that we really need to look at. Using low till to prevent soil loss and keep our biodome healthy. Again, looking at our soil health that Patricia's talking about. One of the key pieces moving forward is really, what do we do with that? How are we going to continue to work on our soil health? And what does that look like? Because it is such a mix of science and really looking at landscaping and all those key pieces of agroecology I'll talk about in a moment. Really looking at water health and soil health, making sure there's no runoff. Using pest management and preventing herbicide and pesticide use. Pest management is one of the easier pieces to kind of figure out, whether you're small scale farming on like the friendship farms or the gardens. Pest management of understanding of this pest always is attracted to this plant, but this plant doesn't like it, so let's grow this next to this. That's kind of pest management. And there's no reason to use herbicides or pesticides when you're kind of doing it that way, and that's part of agroecology. And the idea of agroecology and regenerative practices are really about harmonizing. That's everything from what does the pollinators look like in this space to soil health, to where are the trees in this area that's blocking the wind from preventing the soil being, wind blown off, to where does the runoff go, and all there's so much involved, but it's about harmonizing that whole process on the biological land or water system that you're using. So, and carbon sequestration, again, just what Patricia's saying, that's a way we can really capture that. In agriculture, there's a lot of different processes in use with that. Fantastic, Carol. She said, thank you and congratulations on the great efforts. We're attempting to take all in our consideration, take the town's comprehensive plan and coastal marine. Awesome. Thank you. So this is all like completely reliant on each other. And when you work on one, you work on them all. That's why I showed that model at the beginning. All those particular pieces, it's like a molecule and they all impact each other. All right, let's move on. What does fishing look like in the climate change and what we could do? Like preventing runoff into waters is one of the big things. And again, you're looking at all these different ways from sewer to our farming that do runoff into water systems. Preventing overfishing, that's really a big issue. We're a little bit better in the United States than other countries. China and Japan, there's some big overfishing that's happening, but at least in our area, we're doing the most we can with understanding that. And stopping bottom trawling, for those of you who don't know, it's kind of like a drag and net along the bottom of the ocean floor, and you're destroying everything along the ocean floor as you do that. But it's one of the ways that industrial fishing, they capture a lot of stuff through that way. The big thing that we can work on in Massachusetts that directly coincides with a lot of environmental work is the single-use plastics. So the industrial food system and our food system, like going to a grocery store or even going to a farmer's market, is making sure we're not using those single-use plastics, whether it's a water bottle, a container, whatever we're buying our food in, it's in the food system, and that's a huge problem. And those single-use plastics in Massachusetts, there's several bills, if you're interested in looking at that, about getting rid of single-use plastics. And certainly we have a ton of plastic in our water, and we have a ton of things that are in the plastics that are in our own bodies. So plastics are something that crosses over from environmental justice to the food system and to other areas that we can look at. There's a lot of carbon sequestration issues in the seafood industry that we can look at. Seaweed is just one of them. So we can look more into climate change mitigation in our seafood system. And certainly I've been hammering on the sewer systems, and I say that because I live in an area that was directly impacted by this with the aquaculture within our own sewer system. So, and I work with a lot of aquaculturemen who are in a system where they might be now losing their aquaculture farms due to this. So looking at putting money in the town system to update all of our sewer system and drawing down money, working with the state government and the federal government to pull down more money so we can do more with the infrastructure updates in our water and sewer systems is incredibly important to our creating a resilient food system in our area. So I'll continue on. Now, looking at that middle piece of processing, aggregation, and distribution, looking at subsidiarity, which is a philosophical point or a development point of always using what is closest in the supply chain. So whether you're doing development work of buying local food to give away, you always want to you don't want to bring food from a great distance to somewhere else. We saw that during the pandemic. A huge chunk of our food, about 40 to 50% of our fruits and vegetables come from California. And you saw what happened during the pandemic with all those empty shelves. And the idea is to move all our procurement processes over to local production. So that's a huge problem. But if we did that, it would cut down dramatically on our carbon footprint. The issue with that is, again, it goes back to, do we have enough small and mid-sized aggregators and processors and distributors? And the answer is no. So even if we tried to get our local school systems to get more food, or our local hospitals, or our local prisons, or even grocery stores to get more food from the local food system, the issue is we don't have enough mid-size and small size aggregators and processors and distributors to actually handle that. So we would have to work with farmers in a long-term plan to actually do that. If we can promise a local farmer, we will buy X ton of this from your farm every year, they can start looking at how do we grab grant money, how do we make more money and put it into this particular piece where we can then actually produce more greenhouses so we can produce this all year round to supply this more locally. So you're looking at this really large problem from our whole region, not just the Cape and Islands, but our whole region. How do we build that infrastructure in to help to build local processing, local aggregation and distribution from our local system to keep the food and help expand the food? Because the idea from New England Feeding New England research is by 2030, we have to increase our production of food by 30%. That's a lot from our food, from our fishing industry, from our agriculture industry, increasing food production for Massachusetts by 30% by 2030 requires physical infrastructure we currently do not have. And that's a huge problem. So that's one thing, but it would also cut dramatically down on our carbon footprint. So using biodegradable packaging would be another particular piece in this area that would be really helpful. So if everything you're seeing, like when you go to a grocery store, you go to a farmer's market and you see everything in biodegradable material, that would be super huge and help us with climate change resiliency impacts at compacting. I saw some stuff in the chat that I'm going to just say. I'm going to just address that, make sure we don't forget that. So Kim also said, many practitioners of regenerative agriculture actually recommend more animal in food production systems, especially cattle on marginal grasslands. Animal impacts can restore grasslands and sequester carbon. Absolutely. Sorry if I wasn't going more into that. I appreciate you, Kim, saying that. For sure, that's way to actually help the soil, also having animals on there and all those particular places. Thank you for putting the Savory Global into that. And Patricia Gadsby and composting toilets. Awesome. Perfect. I love that. We do that on Round the Bend Farm. It's one of the other farms that I help out at that does that, but we can encourage more of that. Composting toilets is awesome. But yeah, having holistic look at food production with animals on a farm is big. I think what I didn't say is really looking at the industrial food system for animal and how we grow animals and raise animals on the industrial food system is not working, and that is the piece we need to look at. Thank you for saying those things. So right, in this system, using biodegradable packaging is really key, and buying local. Those are all the key pieces, and local infrastructure needs to be built, and I can't emphasize that enough. Why do we need to increase food production by 30% by 2030? So we are too reliant currently on the food coming in from the Southeast and the Midwest and the Southwest and the West. So California is the biggest food economy in the United States. And the problem is the environmental impacts on that is actually so dire that we can't rely on them. And we're seeing more crazy things like long-term droughts in that area, but we're also seeing, like in the Southeast, flooding. And what we're mapping out is the flooding is going to continue to happen. It's going to be worse over time. Same with the fires and the droughts. We're seeing those climate systems are constantly staying in one area for a long time before moving on. That's what we're seeing, that's the climate change impact. So what we're seeing is we need to build our infrastructure and be more self-reliant in New England. So we're not reliant on all these outside food areas to get our food. And that's not even going to be 100%. So just by increasing us to 30% we're still going to be reliant on other food sources outside of New England for our food. And that's part of the challenge is we will never be 100% self-reliant in New England. We will always need the food from the rest of the United States, but we need to figure that particular piece out. And I looked at the research, and the research indicates that might be doable, and it might also kind of hit some of those climate impacts to make us more resilient in our system. So when we do have those fires, we do have those big storms that wipe out crops, like in Western Mass last year, that we do have other sources in diversity and other redundant systems that can actually handle those types of massive impacts. And including, we're seeing the rise of diseases, like COVID was just one of them. We'll see more of those over time. So we're just looking at knowing that those diseases can also impact the labor market within the food system. How do we then be more local? So when that happens, the local farming community, the local fishing community can step into that void, but they need all those particular pieces set up to be able to do that. All right, and looking more at access and consumption, and again, it's going back to buying local. If we can focus on that, we'll be putting more of the ability for the local production system to actually build the infrastructure needed so we can actually produce more. Swap food tables is something that is an old idea that I've been kind of shopping around to. So whether you're in a small farming community or your community garden or your friend's garden, it's just to have a table laid out, and when you have excess food, just laying it on the table. I talk about this in the HUD housing. Some of the HUD housing facilities get all kinds of food, and oftentimes, depending on your diet, when you are low income, if you are diabetic or you have a heart condition, there's certain foods you cannot eat. And so we've been shopping around that idea. Have a table where you just share your excess food with the community and swap out everything. And so we've been promoting that idea. It's a very old idea, but we just suggest that. Certainly the community gardens, we talked about that, but finding a way to have more of those and even your own gardening on your land. And then bringing the food to people instead of asking them to come to the farmer's market. So the idea of building more capacity for mobile farm markets is really key, and online buying systems where the food is actually then delivered to people in need. I say this because there's so many, our aging population is here. We have to address this now. And those are the people that are the most vulnerable. They're often on a food budget that does not allow them transportation, or that they're immobile. So we have to find more ways to bring that healthy food to people, whether that's having farmers market. We have a lot, we're in our area now, we're developing more farmers markets in the actual HUD building facilities. So it's just looking about different models that will work in different communities. So there's more food on the premises of people who really need it. So that's what I talk about. That's what I'm talking about there. Erica, I'm looking into your chat. What funding is available to support small farms and increase food production 30% in Massachusetts? That's a variety of, that's a huge question. So there's a ton of MDAR grants and EPA grants that I would suggest looking at the state level. And they're drawing down that funding from the USDA, which again goes back to policy. The state cannot draw down this money from the USDA or the EPA until it's in the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill and all those different bills that are within that package are not yet passed. So there's still opportunities now to do advocacy on the Farm Bill to make sure there's more money into climate change mitigation for the USDA that will then go down to the farming community. But until that happens, that's where we need the resources. So again, it requires political, legislative advocacy to make sure the funding is there. Otherwise, the funding is going to go towards other places. So we need more money in the EPA and the USDA grants that are going into the farming climate mitigation areas. So that's what I would suggest is a way to help out. And then as you're a farmer, you oftentimes don't have the time to go do the research on a grant or to write a grant. So it's really looking for people who can help you with grant writing at a very technical level. And then there's the back end of grant writing for a government grant is actually all the follow through pieces. There's a lot there. So just consider maybe working with the farming community, whether it's for Falmouth farming or CMAP or a particular farmer, and see what they need. And there's MDAR has a lot of the grants, and the EPA at the state level have a lot of the grants. There are a lot, but you just don't know about them. And then you need help actually writing that. So there's just a lot of technical assistance involved in this. So those are the pieces I would suggest to help the farming community. All right, for food waste and recovery to be resilient based on climate change, again, going back into that food waste graphic, buy only what you need, make only what you need. Bring access to food pantries, and I said the rule of thumb is always when you're planning a meal, plan the back end side of it. So whether it's freezing or you're bringing it to a food pantry, plan that ahead of time, not at the last moment. Learn how to compost, learn what other places compost, and figure out a way to make those systems really fluid. Learn how to can. I think one of the great things to bring back is actually teaching people how to can, how to dry food, and how to freeze food. I can't undersell that, because what we're finding in the local communities is that people don't know how to do that anymore. They don't know how to actually take food that's excess, boil it down and put it into cans. They don't know how to freeze it, or certainly don't have the actual machinery to dry it, or may not know how to dry it. Kim, thank you for the chat to advocate for regenerative practices in the Farm Bill. Kiss the ground advocacy, brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for posting that. So the other piece is composting within your own community gardens to maintain that soil health. So you want to constantly look at maintaining, growing that soil health, and growing legumes and other things that put nitrogen back into the ground. All those beautiful pieces. So all those are things that can be done. You guys can work on all these pieces of the food system and food recovery waste that address climate change. All right, I'm going to stop sharing there. Check the time, 15 minutes left. Are there any questions so far, or any comments before I move into kind of the Southcoast Food Policy Council and some of the pieces where you can get involved, and the Frogfoot Farm piece too?
Actually, I have a question.
Sure.
What are the best places to get technical assistance for grants?
That's great. All right. One of the key, so are you partners with CISA?
No, we've been
Okay.
making our own grants.
All right, so CISA, sorry, I'm going to Google this really quick so I can put it into the link for you. So CISA, C-I-S-A, sorry, is part of a statewide organization. So CMAP, the Southeastern Agricultural Partnership, is one of the members of CISA.
Mm-hmm.
So it's called a buy local. So all the buy locals across Massachusetts, there are 6 of them. So all the buy locals actually provide technical assistance for farmers on grants. And if you belong to their email distribution link, like they'll send you, we're having a workshop on this particular grant, come join the workshop. So your closest buy local is the Southeastern Massachusetts Agricultural Partnership Association.
Okay, I knew about CMAP, but I didn't know whether Cape Cod would qualify, because we have our own Buy Fresh, Buy Local.
Yeah, so if you have a buy local, that's who you should be going to for technical assistance. They're set up as they get state money. They get $1 million every year. Part of that money is technical assistance writing. That's the purpose of all the buy locals, is to help promote buying local, but also promoting and doing technical assistance and education for farmers. That's the sole purpose of all the buy locals. However, that running them, they all look very different, and what their boundaries are different, but that they do provide technical assistance. And if you go to MDAR might provide, so Massachusetts Department of Agricultural Resources actually might have their own programming as well. They certainly do a ton of grant work, and sometimes they provide their own webinars for all the grants that they do, and sometimes they rely on the buy locals to do that as well. So I would look in both directions for that. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, and also NOFA, but it sounded like you were already connected with NOFA on those particular things too. Yeah, great question. Other questions or comments so far? And Tricia, the only other thing I can think of is to actually talk to other farmers who are doing grant work as well, and maybe particularly partnership with a farmer that's local to you on a particular grant. The USDA loves when you can partnership. They're actually more likely to give you something through partnership grants. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to just quickly jump then into looking at, so the Southcoast Food Policy Council is our local for our area. We're the one, there is no other Southcoast, there's no Food Policy Council in our region. We are it. I know the Cape and Islands is looking at potentially what that potentially could look like. We want to partner with them on this and helping bring the Cape and Islands into what we're doing, but we're not ready yet. So I just want to be transparent about that. We're in talks with the Cape and Islands about that, but we're not yet ready for that. We're still trying to get our feet cemented in Bristol County and Plymouth County, but we are looking at that in the future. Our structure is currently set up where we have 20 to 30 community advisory board members. We also have two full-time staff and one part-time staff. We have 4 working groups that are the policy, food access, education, communication, and capacity building. And we have food equity advisors. Those are people on SNAP and HIP, or people with lived experience of hunger who are in our working groups or in different parts of, there might be in the community advisory board, that are actually have their voice at the table. And also they also speak directly with legislators and are bringing in the testimonial parts of, this is actually the lived experience and this is why you should be funding these pieces. So our annual events, we're doing an eLocal Southcoast Challenge that we're doing a sign up right now for, where you receive an email once a week for 6 weeks on tips to eLocal. That's also providing more education on the food system. We do a Hunger Action Month partnership lift every September where we're saying, hey, these groups need help with volunteering for Hunger Action Month. These groups need donations. These, whatever's happening in the community, we raise up the efforts of our partners during that time. We do a food summit, which is always an education in the food system. Last year, we did food recovery and food waste with the EPA. We also do advocacy at the state house level. Also, in this past year, we did a HIP lobby day where 8 members together went over to the state house and lobbied with a bunch of other statewide organizations. We also do district meetings and advocacy with our technology, where it's a one-click action. We do quarterly meetings so anybody in the public can come to our quarterly meetings. We do policy and advocacy trainings on training up an organization. This is how you do advocacy. We give everybody the templates so it's all in place. Your organization can take the policy training and just run with it. We continue to do our advocacy training and advocacy through Action Network. We do a legislative breakfast every year in January. We do a candidate forum every 2 years at the state level if there are contested races in our area. So those are the particular pieces that were our annual events that we work on. So I'm going to not speak specifically about this because you'll have the PowerPoint. Just know that we continue to do this. We work in partnership with the community to do a legislative breakfast where we have congressmen and legislators come. They basically get to hear directly from the organizations doing advocacy on their priorities, and it's a way to make relationship with legislators. We continue to work with our members to send letters to legislators, and we continue to lobby in a variety of different issues. And we do we have that 5-module training that I do in legislative advocacy training. In our education work group, we're currently doing the education on the eLocal Southcoast Challenge. We do the Hunger Sabbath as a new piece where we're trying to get all our faith groups to actually go to their pulpit and actually talk about food insecurity. And I know that's really hard for some groups. So we're putting together a packet. So it's basically a template for anybody to stand up at the pulpit and be like, this is what food insecurity looks like in our area. These are great things our congregation is doing. But there's something unusual happening right now where we're seeing, I will say this, in Bristol County, we have seen a 23% increase in people going to food pantries. So it's probably mirrored in some fashion on the Cape, but we're seeing an increase of people going to food pantries since 2023. So that's one of the places we know where people take a lot of action is in faith groups. So that's just a packet we're putting together. The capacity building group, we're starting a particular tool called a CARROT. It's Community and Agricultural Resiliency Tool. And we're basically, instead of doing a food system assessment, we're doing a live nationwide beta testing tool that we're hoping to use instead of our food system assessment. We're piloting in it, and if it works out, we'll invite the Cape to join this process. The food access, we're working, one of the key pieces that we're looking at is providing more USDA commodities to food pantries. Part of that is that food pantries may not be part of the USDA commodities program, or they may be, but they don't have the trucking capacity or the storage space capacity to actually do anything about that. So what we're doing is a pilot program with the Greater Boston Food Bank, with some of the food pantries in New Bedford, greater New Bedford area, to see if we can get more of the USDA commodities into the food pantries. And just know, once we get that model up and running, I'll reach back out to Andrea Marsley on Cape Cod Extension for this model. And if the Cape wants to pick it up, they can, but I'm just trying to make it work in our area. And then once we get all the problems hammered out, we'll try to share that model so you can potentially use that model on the Cape. Frog Fit Farm, this is our farm to food relief program, very similar to Falmouth farming, where we're trying to create a farm where all that food will actually go into the food pantry system. So we just started about a month ago, where we hired a farmer and a gleaning coordinator. I'm going to check into, thank you, Paula, that is the email for anybody who wants to contact me about any of these things. Thank you. Oops. All right. Oops. Let me go back one. So Erica asked me to speak very briefly about Frog Fit Farm, our neighbors feeding neighbors. So we are leasing land from 80 Makepeace. That was the land on 80 Makepeace. It's 6 acres. That was the place where they stored all the sand. So we're starting our soil with sand. It's just a huge swath of sand. And so for the next 3 to 5 years, all we're doing is soil amending. So you can see this is our hope for the farm. We have to do a ton of work. So I'm going to go to the next slide so you can see what we're doing right now. All we're trying to do is build microbial life. So we're feeding the soil, we're testing the soil, it's super acidic, so we're adding lime, we're applying compost at least 3 inches deep, we're going and covering a crop summer, fall, and winter. We have berms that are now set up. Berms are kind of raised ridges on a farm. We're using that for several reasons. One, as you know, the winds can be pretty strong, and we just have soil like that. You need some way to stop the wind. And if you can't plant trees, you need something. So we're using berms. So we built all the berms currently around the edging. And we're actually going to use that as to plant vegetables that will attract pollinators. We're using that for pest management as well. And those will be permanent. And then we're actually currently, all we did recently was just dig into the soil, the sandy soil, and put down the irrigation system. That'll be a drip irrigation system that leads into the water source that we have. That's all we've done so far, plus the BioBlitz. So we've done a BioBlitz is when we invited the community to come onto the land, and we used a particular app on our phone, and we actually took pictures of anything that was alive to do basically a scan of what's alive on the farm, from birds, pests, things that are growing in the sand, so we can do a baseline. So we basically want to figure out what are we doing in our agroecology practices that are bringing more life onto the farm. And we want over time to show that our practices are actually impacting the biodiversity on the farm. If you want more details, I suggest, Scott said you can contact him at his email. He is the farmer that is kind of putting these pieces together with our gleaning coordinator, who's also another farmer as well. I'm going to go into the chat. I see there's something there. I'm going to send my slides, Stephen, to Erica, and however Erica provides that to you. So it'll be there. So Scott Cody is the person to contact if you want more information on how they're going to do regenerative practices on the farm. He's your guy. But yeah, there we go. So quickly, I want to share So we have the eLocal Southcoast Challenge. You're welcome to join into that. It's just, again, a 1 week, 6 weeks, where once a week you will get an email, and it's just tips to eat local. And it gives you education on different parts of the food system and things you need to know. It'll also have tips on how to take action on the different parts of the food system. So I give you a lot of tips to take action, and these emails will also do that. And again, the idea is to help people eat local by helping them see it's not that difficult. So all those farmers markets that you guys have, like, yeah, this is one of those things. And right now, the last year was the first year we did this. This is the second year. And maybe in the future, we're going to change it to Southeastern Mass. But right now, I'll be honest, most of we're pointing at is more South Coast resourcing. But in the future, we'll see if we can bring in the Cape and Islands into this. So it'll be more of like Cape and Islands. I don't know what we'll call it, but just know in the future, we want to expand this eLocal challenge into our food shed. We're just not there yet with our education and our outreach yet. So I just ask you to bear with us and be patient. But for right now, we encourage you. Thank you for sharing that, Paula, for sharing that link to register for the eLocal Southcoast Challenge. So these are the particular pieces of legislative advocacy that our Southcoast Food Policy Council identified based on our priorities. So we looked at the priorities and looked at what piece of policy matches up to those particular priorities. So that's how we devised basically this monster list of pieces that we're following and we do legislative advocacy on. So donations to persons in need, which is actually funds farmers. It gives farmers a stipend up to $5,000 for the food they donate, but it also extends the protection for somebody who's receiving the food. So it's a both win for the person receiving, the person donating food, and so that's what that bill is. And basic needs assistance for immigrant residents. The Cape and the South Coast, we have a big immigrant community, and what this does is actually it's a state-funded SNAP program. So most SNAP is a federal program, but we were asking the state to provide SNAP funding for specific immigrants that are in humanitarian aid situations to be funded for SNAP. That did not pass, but just to let you know, that's what we're working on. Equity and health, the health incentive program, the agricultural healthy incentive program, is that SNAP HIP match that just use exclusively at farmers markets and farm stands that will help people who use SNAP. The Farm to School grant, that's an infrastructure grant program that allows schools to actually build more raised beds, do more curriculum education, and procure more food from local farms. And that's what that grant is for. The Farm to School Partnership Program is actually incentivizing schools to buy more locally. They'll get, for every dollar they spend on local food in Massachusetts, they get $3. I think for every $3, they get $1 back. I think that's what it is. That didn't go anywhere, but just know that we're working on that. The food literacy is actually getting DESE to create a curriculum that every school is now required to teach food literacy from K to 12. That'll help us in the future going forward with all of our food work, because it'll cover anything from food nutrition to food production to food processing, and it covers the whole food system. Equity in agriculture is basically putting a commission in to do a study to identify the barriers in agriculture, because there are many. So we need to identify those particular pieces, and certainly protecting the soil and farms from PFAS. We're looking at minimum wages. We want those closer to a living wage, and covering all the food system budget items and the Congressional Farm Bill. So there's a lot of pieces that we work. You can join us by Paula put in my email. If you want to become a member and just receive the legislative advocacy and just do those pieces. Right now, we are doing pieces on the legislative advocacy alert. So if you go to this website, this link on the bottom is our current advocacy to contact your members about protecting SNAP in the Farm Bill. And just to remember, if people are, this is a win-win all the way around for the people that are in the food system, for us to be able to buy to buy healthy food in our food system. And that's all I have. I'm looking at the time. We're a little over. I'm sorry, but there we go. That's all I have. If there are other pieces that you would like to discuss and you have time to stay on, I'm happy to have that discussion.
Thank you so much, Christine, for this inclusive and comprehensive presentation, and to all those people who participated. And I'm sure this is a link between us and the Marion Institute on Cape Cod and each other. I hope that we'll grow. And thank you. Thank you.
One day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Could somebody please post that last Action Network link?
Yeah.
I have a question about collaborating
Mhm.
do you collaborate at all with NOFA's advocacy or Nationally Organic Consumers Association or?
Yes, actually, last year we focused heavily on NOFA's advocacy all last year. We had their entire comprehensive 12 title. Here, I'm going to post this. So last year's advocacy, we focused really on the 12 titles in our advocacy efforts, and it was directly from NOFA Massachusetts, and then we combined it with the advocacy from FRAC. So I'm going to put on here this particular piece of advocacy that I just shared is specific to FRAC. FRAC is the Food and Research Action Council. I am going to pull up their advocacy action here. Let me get that link so you can see and grab for yourself and get on their email. So FRAC is one of the national organizations that's widely recommended for the food advocacy, these pieces. Although I will say most of their work is geared towards low income, looking at immigrant issues, the low income side. So that's really, and NOFA nationally, and NOFA New England, NOFA Massachusetts is looking at the farming community advocacy. So really you could take, the Farm Bill is so huge, you can take pieces of it, advocate for specific pieces. In this case, I'm really specifically looking at SNAP, which is 80% of the Farm Bill is SNAP. That's of the total budget. But yeah, we do work with them, with FRAC with NOFA on Farm Bill advocacy.
Do you have an opinion on the OCA and their advocacy? I mean, they have a sophisticated program which takes you right to your state reps. They have all
a lot of the technology does that. Now it depends. Every organization that like this. So no, I don't have an opinion on that. On what did you call it? OCS?
Yeah,
OCA.
Organic Consumers Association.
I'm sorry, I don't follow that particular advocacy. I mean, I will for research, but I'm kind of following my Massachusetts partners, and our partner for agriculture is NOFA Massachusetts. So I kind of follow them. It's not that I won't do other advocacy, but I kind of take their lead on that. Yeah, there's a lot of great groups, but I have no opinion on their work.
They go into the big picture, like they've just been working on synthetic foods, how they're being
great.
slipped into our diets.
Yeah, I would say 90% of my work in our work in the Southcoast Food Policy Council state, because we're part of the state food policy council, not a national food policy council. So we work specifically on the state, and we do kind of 10% of our work is the national level, but we follow the national leaders. And yeah, Organic Consumers Association, great work that they do. Yeah.
Waiting for you to elaborate more on pest management.
What would you like to know? There is a pest management program and system in place at Massachusetts. They have a plan. So are you looking for specifics or grant money for that, or?
Well, I'm looking to see how we can decrease use of pesticides.
Yeah. So yeah, you can get trained up on pest management. And I think there are several guides out there on how to do that for the farming community.
I know of natural predators of the garden pests, the crop pests, like the ground beetles, ladybugs, toads.
Really, most of my knowledge on the pest management system is actually at the state level as I'm going to pull it up on the Massachusetts website and share that, is the policy side. We've been trying to advocate for more of the pest management in our policy work, and that's the pieces I know that I have worked with Representative Schmidt on for the pest management system, but we advocate for that, and I think NOFA does as well. So I know there's programs out there for pest management, and there's a lot of information. I'm not an expert in it, but we were advocating for the pest management policy work to kind of take down some of the barriers to accessing that, and making sure it's more comprehensive and more that towns even put in town ordinances around pest management and protection of lands and conservation of lands. We're using pest management as well. So there's a lot to that.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed your talk, your presentation immensely.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Yes, I'd like to comment as an old Pioneer attendee that you've wonderfully followed through on some of the threads of the Pioneer conferences. That is to bring it local and really right into the neighborhood.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it, and thank you for the invitation. And we love to partner more with the Cape, but like I said, it'll take a little bit of time.
And thank you everyone who attended.
Thank you.